I'm sure you guys are all aware that recently there's been a trade war going on, and yeah, this all started when Trump got elected, and he was saying that he was going to tariff Canada and and Mexico because Canada and Mexico have been treating the United States unfairly. Now he's lived up to a lot of his campaign promises. Either they're good promises or bad promises, and this was one of his promises, right? That he's going to tariff Mexico and Canada. We'll leave Mexico aside for this episode because I don't think any of us are Mexican, and we don't like really know anything about the Mexico side of things. But we can speak a lot on the Canadian side of things. And yeah, basically on Tuesday this week, Trump launched basically a tariff war, right? 25% tariffs on pretty much everything. And that did go into effect for around 24 hours. And then after that, he did repeal some of the automobile tariffs. And then today, earlier, we just got the news that most tariffs will be paused that were exempt under the USMCA, US Canada Mexico agreement, which is like the NAFTA 2.0. So we did get another 1 month reprieve for now. Now most things are exempt from the USMCA anyway. So basically, we rolled back everything to the way that it was before until April 2nd. In which case, we'll have to see what happens, right? And yeah, this news has not gone over well with a lot of Canadians. I know a lot of Canadians right here at home are very upset, frustrated, angry from all the people that I've talked to. And Trudeau, for once, decided to put Canada first. I watched Trudeau's speech right after the tariffs came into effect, and I thought that it was unusually strong for Trudeau. So give credit where credit is due, right? Kudos to him for finally standing up and putting Canada first. Although it does kind of suck that he decided to stand up for Canada finally on his last week on the job, but that's besides the point. But anyways, before we get into talking about the tariffs more kind of deeply, I know again a lot of people are upset, but let me just maybe go through some of the reasons why Trump might be doing this, right? I know it's easy for us to jump to the conclusion that Trump is just an a-hole. He's just being a bully. He's Hitler, right? He wants to destroy us all, and that's why he's doing this, because he's evil. But there might be other reasons why he thinks it's a good idea to do it. Again, I'm not saying I agree with what he's doing, but I'm just saying that if you think from his perspective, maybe he does have some justifications on why he thinks these tariffs are a good idea, right? So let's scroll down on the docket and let me present to you. Let's do this list first, actually. So if you go to this tweet by John Najarian, who said, here's a list of Canadian tariffs on US goods. Now, I did fact check this with Grok, and some of these are not entirely 100% accurate, because some of them are if you it's up to a certain percentage. So it's not when it's milk, it's not probably 270% tariffs on everything blanket, but it's just under certain conditions it could go up to that number. And also some of them are the tariffs only apply if it's over a certain amount. So don't take the numbers themselves as gospel. The numbers might be slightly different, but the point that I think John Najarian was trying to illustrate was that Canada already puts a lot of tariffs, and these are things that have tariffs on them despite the USMCA and all the free trade deals that we've talked about before. So that's one thing that maybe there is some categories of things. Again, I'm not trying to justify what Trump is doing, hitting us with blanket tariffs, but there are some things where it does seem like the Canadian government is reaching in and protecting certain industries and not letting the free market compete in certain places, right? And yeah, that's kind of the point where we should be a little bit more thoughtful and logical over it instead of letting our emotions take over. I know emotions are high right now. As for why Trump is targeting Canada and Mexico specifically, I want you guys to scroll back up to the import and export chart. So Canadian exports, uh, it accounts for 78% of our exports are to the U.S. from Canada, right? And the U.S. On the U.S. side, the imports from Canada, so that 78% that we export to the U.S., it only accounts for 14% of their imports, and a lot of it's actually oil, which is even when Trump is like threatening to tariff us, and he actually did tariff us, it's only 10% on oil, so it's like a lot of it is oil. And oil, he decided to give us kind of like a reprieve by only doing 10%. And then for Mexico, it's even bigger, right? It's 80% of their exports go to the U.S., which accounts for 15% of the U.S. imports. So what this chart is trying to illustrate is basically that, in a trade war, unfortunately, as much as I hate to admit it as a Canadian, we are on the weaker side, right? Not that we can't cause the U.S. pain if they decided to do this, but our ability to weather such a trade war is a lot less than the U.S. And I think that Trump is realizing this point. And I know like people are saying that, oh, the U.S. is supposed to be our ally. Why are they being so like adversarial towards us? Look, like this is just how Trump rolls, and unfortunately, there's not that much we can do about it besides complain, which we are doing. But what are you going to do, right? It doesn't actually solve the problem. In terms of, again, why he's doing this, I know a lot of people are jumping to conclusions that he just like, he's just a bad guy and he just, hates us and he just, wants the world to burn, blah, blah, blah. But let me present to you an alternative, maybe explanation, right? So here is the US 10-year Treasury yield. I took this I think yesterday or a couple of days ago. So it might be a little bit different now, but I don't know what the exact yield is right now. But just a couple of days ago, it was at 4.2%. So the reason why this is important is because of the next graphic, which is the U.S. debt ticking time bomb, as Invest Answers calls it. So I stole this from Invest Answers. Credits to him. Basically, the U.S. needs to refinance $9 trillion of debt this year. That's maturing this year. Now, when they refinance the debt, they need to, pay off the old bond, like sell a new bond to pay off the old bond, right? So when you sell the new bond, the 10-year yield is kind of what the U.S. has to pay, like the interest they have to pay when they refinance the debt, right? So it's just like a mortgage. When you renew your mortgage, you have to accept the new interest rate. So as the person who's borrowing, in this case the U.S. government, you want the yield to be as low as possible, right? Because then that means your interest rate that you're borrowing is as low as possible. So Trump has a massive incentive to bring this 10-year Treasury yield down, and the lower he can bring it, the lower in terms of interest he can do to can pay when he refinances the debt. And that's like a very important thing, because it doesn't sound like a lot. Like, what's the difference between 5% and 4% on the 10-year yield, right? Like when you have $9 trillion of debt that you need to refinance, 100 basis points is a lot, right? And it can definitely make a huge difference. So I think what Trump is doing is that he's trying to cause all these cause turmoil, cause recession fears. And when recession fears heats up, people like rush in to lock in like the higher interest rates, the higher yields, which if a lot of people rushes in to buy bonds, it pushes the yield down, right? So the market is kind of doing that job of letting the US refinance their debt for cheaper. when there's recession fears. So there's a theory out there that Trump is actually just he's not targeting Canada specifically. It's not because he like personally hates, or maybe he personally hates Trudeau too, but like it's not like him specifically going after Canada or going after Mexico. He's actually just trying to like cause turmoil so that he can refinance the debt, because that is a very important part of his agenda, is to solve kind of the fiscal problem. Now, finally, with regards to hope for the future, is everything lost? Are we just done? Well, let's look at the Kobesi letter, right? In the Kobesi letter, I would say they're actually like fairly bearish a lot of the time. So they're not like a permeable publication, in case you guys are wondering that. The Kobesi letter said, another topic that we have to discuss is the Trump tariff war 1.0, right? So we actually have a point of reference from when Trump was president for his first term, where he also, tariffed a lot of countries, although, not to this extent. But he tariffed China for real, and then there was a trade war and everything, right? And then the stock market also went down when he went on this like kind of crusade of tariffing people, and then it went down for a bit, and then it bounced back up. At least that's, and then we're also tracking the performance of the first time when he did this trade war thing. We're tracking that performance pretty well. So if everything is to like be the same and we were to keep tracking the 2019 performance, then that means that the bottom is probably close, right? And then also, like, you got to keep in mind that Trump, although he says he doesn't care about the stock market, at some point he does have to care, right? Because if he absolutely crashes everything, like if the S&P goes down 50%, there's going to be like riots in the streets, and he's not going to want that, and that's not helpful to him either, right? So at some point there's what's called a de facto Trump put, and maybe we're not there yet, but at some point he's going to have to care, and that's basically what happened in 2019. You can see that the Kobesi letter on the chart that they published, they illustrated that level, which like the S&P fell really hard, and then like everyone's like, Trump sucks, F Trump, and then he had to call off like the tariffs on Mexico and all that stuff, and then start talks with China to kind of potentially reach a trade deal. So that's kind of a historical kind of point of reference to maybe give you guys some hope. And then lastly, the Kobesi letter says long-term investors in Trump trade war 1.0 capitalize on some great bargains. So it was a great buying opportunity if you manage to buy stocks or buy risk assets kind of at the bottom during that dip that we talked about earlier. And then even the Kobesi letter says they maintain the view that Trump's ultimate ultimate goal with this tariff war is to reach a deal, right? And reach a deal that is favorable to the United States. Maybe sometimes it's going to be, a lot of the times it's going to be at the expense of US allies such as Canada, but hey, like this is Trump's America First agenda, right? Like he wants to reach a deal that he finds more favorable to the United States. And eventually that is most likely going to be the case. I tend to agree with the Kobesi letter here. And the Kobesi letter says, we do not believe that President Trump wants to keep the tariffs running for months and years, because like you said, I think last episode, Tristan, it does hurt both sides, right? Like eventually it's going to cause problems for the United States as well if you just blanket tariff 25% on the entire world, basically, right? So I don't think that that's actually the end game. I think that the end game is to eventually reach a deal. And we've seen like a lot of flip-flopping on Trump's side, right? Because he said, at first he said it was going to be February 1st that the tariffs are going to be implemented. And then he pushed it back a month, and then it went into effect for like a day. And then he's like, oh, no auto tariffs. I talked to the auto company CEOs, and they don't like it. So I'm going to cancel that part. And then now we just got the news that he pushed it back till April 2nd now. So, every time it just keeps getting pushed back. And the more this happens, I feel like every time the effect on the market and the less like credibility it has, eventually this trick is going to stop working. And I don't think that the plan is to like keep doing this forever, right? Eventually, um, he's going to have to. His goal is to reach a deal, in my opinion. But that's my opinion. You're free to disagree or agree with it, however you like. I just want to kind of get you guys' take on all of this. Like, what do you think Trump is getting at here? What is his end game? Do you think that anything that Trump is doing? I know, like, you guys probably think that most of it's unjustified, but is there any like credence to Trump's complaints, like the stuff about Canadian tariffs against the U.S., like I mentioned earlier, with the milk and the cheese and dairy products, especially. Yeah, just I'm gonna leave it open. Just kind of get you guys' thoughts.
The theory that you posted by the Kobayashi, I think it's called Kobayashi letter, is really interesting. Just because this has been something that's kind of been covered in like Bitcoin and investing world for a couple of years now. That the amount of debt that's coming due, and like Trump kind of got left with a mess. I mean, he wanted to, I guess, but I think in the end, it's actually a really interesting and compelling theory because if Trump can put pressure, Trump has been putting pressure on the Fed. We know he's probably doing it behind the scenes. He's been explicitly saying that he wants rates lower, and yeah, this kind of goes along with the script. In terms of that being Trump's only goal, yeah, I think that this could be a part of the plan, but I can't really prove it. That's the only thing. I can only base it on the same report that I read on the internet. But basically, in the end, is Trump going to be able to create enough market fear to get rates low enough that America is going to be able to lock in like pretty decent long term rates? I think it's possible. Does Trump like want an end game soon? Like, does Trump care about the market? I think he absolutely does, and he's gonna get a deal through soon. Um, a lot of it ends up being performative. This like he keeps talking about, oh, the tariffs are coming, and then like we get to the end date, and then 2 days later he drops all the tariffs and says, and he keeps talking about fentanyl, which doesn't really seem, at this point in time, it doesn't really seem to be the real reason why he's doing this. I do think that Trump and Trudeau have like this personal beef that's kind of like been a tit for tat thing that's been going on since Trump was president the first time. Trudeau, Trump says a lot of nasty, mean things about a lot of people, including Trudeau, and Trudeau gets his jabs in too. Like even the other day, he opened his speech by saying that Trump was cozying up to Putin and the Russians. So they both get their like vitriol in, and they both kind of have this history. And Trudeau kind of did like go after Trump after he lost against Biden in 2020 a few times and a few statements. So I just think that this is Trump, and he is a petty guy. I'll admit that, even though I kind of supported him in the election. Yeah, he's an extremely petty guy. And do I think that his beef with Trudeau is like a personal one? Yeah, I do. I think he kind of wants to embarrass him, and I think he kind of wants to size him up. I guess in terms of like the idea, like, is there anything about like tariffs in America's position in the world that's justified? Like the position of Canadians, which I think is like on the surface like a fair position, is that like we already renegotiated NAFTA, we got USMCA under Trump, so why is he breaking the deal immediately? And I think that like on the surface, like that's fair. I like, and then the general idea of going after allies, and I guess from my perspective, like I don't focus too much on it, like the Canadian pride and like the emotional side of it, but um, I do understand I do understand that position for the most part, and I think that like overall, like the Canadian government, like both the provinces and the federal government did a sufficient job, like fighting back with their like reciprocal tariffs. Personally, I I think that tariffs are a bad solution because it's like we're going to tax Canadians by increasing tariffs, and then we're going to issue debt and have emergency aid to the Canadian economy. It's just it's kind of a messy situation. Personally, I'd rather like call Trump's bluff and like maybe target a few individual items, but like for the most part, I would call his bluff and not uh, do reciprocal tariffs. But I mean, I'm not going to win that debate in Canadian politics. It seems like Canadians do want blood, so that's the method that worked. And I think that it did somewhat work in spooking Americans. And I'm sure Trump got a lot of phone calls, especially like in the auto sector, where like you can't actually like tariff auto parts. Like you would just totally destroy both Canada and America's like auto sector in that scenario. One of the things I have been thinking about though, like in terms of the whole concept of America first and like what it really means and what Trump's presidency truly means for the world, is that the United States like typically uses like market access as like a geopolitical leverage around the world. Because the United States is such a large economy that everybody wants to be able to sell a lot of their goods to the United States, especially US allies want to be able to sell a lot of goods to the United States, and the United States uses that as leverage, because they sometimes will make deals with European countries, or they'll make deals with Canada or Mexico that basically allow Canada and Mexico to have market access to the U.S. market without dropping tariffs themselves. As we can see, that Canada does have tariffs on things like U.S. steel and aluminum and a few food items, which has been something that's kind of always been like a conflict between the Canada and the United States in their trade talks. That they want access to like our dairy markets, they want access to specific markets. But I think that I mean, this is kind of long-winded, but I think that the problem that America finds itself is that we've been living in this American imperial world since 1945. Um, they've kind of used these asymmetric agreements with countries to allow these countries to have market access to their economy, to a point where like it's not sometimes like if America like lets Germany import luxury vehicles into the United States, and what America gets in the back from that is something that was negotiated in the background, like America gets to have a new military base in Germany or stuff. On the surface, like a lot of people like to talk about like trade economics as on the surface America wins and Germany wins because Germany gets to sell American cars, but America gets to sell German cars. But like when you look at it from more of like a microeconomic standpoint, there are people in America that like suffer as a result of those decisions. Like there are some people in American society bear the costs of these like asymmetric agreements more than others. And I just think that like Trump's political agreement in America first is just really representative of the fact that like America's working class like cannot take any more of America's they're just sick, they just don't have any more patience for America's commitments, and that being the reason for why America can't have an America first policy fundamentally when it comes to economics. And I just think that this is like the natural uh, conclusion to a late stage empire, that eventually you hire a populist who like pulls back on all the commitments all at once, and it kind of forces the world to reset. And like our complacency, like a country like Canada, and the complacency of a lot of allied countries puts us in a position where we want to maintain the status quo because we want to maintain that market access. We feel like we've negotiated fair deals to do that, but America and a lot of Trump's base just has decided that they don't want America's 56-year-old commitments to hold it back from like reindustrializing their country. So I think that that's kind of the situation we find ourselves in, whether or not we feel like it's fair to us or not.
Interesting. You look upset. Let us know why you are upset.
I'm pretty frustrated with the way that Trump has been going about the tariffs. I feel like this has been very much a convoluted mess, which creates a lot of uncertainty in the markets and for companies and just in general, because and I think it also creates a lot of anger towards the US, particularly from countries that are being tariffed. And as part of that, like the way that he's been doing it, it hasn't been like from my perspective, something where the tariffs were ever going to be a long-term method of extracting value from our trade deals, because they've been done in such a as a way to encourage jobs back to America. Just because of the fact that just doing these widespread, everything is being taxed at 25% is just incredibly inefficient, because there's so many intricacies of everything, right? With the car industry being the big one that, you know, comes to mind. Parts for the car industry cross the border like between, you know, 1 in 10 times pretty consistently. The second you start tariffing it on every single entry and exit, it goes from like you can have a part that costs, you know, $7 with no tariffs be like $150 by the end of like traveling through all these tariffs. And there's no way that the car company has sufficient time to reorg their industry so that they can handle this. You're just going to have to pass it on to consumers, because there's no alternative really. Like you either pass it on to consumers, you eat the cost. They don't have that much margin, so they're not going to eat the cost. And all the money just gets passed on to consumers. Consumers have to pay more. That kind of sucks for consumers, and it does feel kind of bad from like a, you know, make America great again perspective, when it's like, hey, we're gonna make it great, except we're gonna make your cars, you know, an extra $10,000 more expensive for the same car that it was a little bit ago, and we haven't brought any more jobs back to America. So I think that a more measured and controlled approach to the tariffs could have been something where they actually could be a long-term benefit to the U.S. Probably still wouldn't be good for us, just to be clear, as Canadians, but I could see a scenario where like this could be used to incentivize companies to spend more in the U.S. over alternatives. Just the way that they've been implemented, where he just puts them on, takes them off, puts them on, takes them off. Oh, it's going to be on this. Oh, it's not going to be on this. Oh, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. Just whatever. We're going to have them. I just feel like that this whole that whole route has been really, really poorly managed. And I mean, in terms of, and I mean, maybe that's intentional. Like, he could be intentionally just crashing the market for you know, as we've established, like with regards to reducing rates and you know, reducing confidence in the market just in general to keep things volatile. I mean, it could be intentional, but again, I just think that it's very jarring to go about it in this fashion, and I don't think that it's going to necessarily result in the same results as if they'd gone through it in a more measured route, because it would be my impression that a lot of companies would be looking at this scenario and going, do I want to get involved in the US when I don't know if tariffs are going to be on Tuesday, gone on Wednesday, and then back again on, you know, the following month's Monday, like the first day of the following month. Like, if I were a company, I wouldn't be necessarily looking to, as if I was international, assuming, I wouldn't be necessarily looking to get into that mess when I have my own, have a domestic market insert like in the EU or something. Whereas before the tariffs were going around, there's probably a lot more of an incentive to seek out opportunities in the US market. And you know, as we've established, kind of the U.S. market is pretty much the ultimate market for companies. Americans spend more. Americans typically make more, and of that money they make, they spend far more of it than almost any other country. So even the developed nations, Canada, the EU, all of them, Americans on average spend a lot more. So getting into the American market is always going to be significantly more valuable to companies than getting into a different market where there is not quite the same willingness to spend, combined with the quantity of capital available overall. Not necessarily every person has all the money, but overall there's more wealth in the US than there is in most other countries. Pretty much any other country. So yeah, I think that Trump is probably using the tariffs as a negotiating strategy. I don't think that this is a long-term plan. I think he wants to just create noise and keep people on their toes. And on that front, I think he's doing a good job. And I think that he's getting a lot of people very stressed. And I think that's his intention, is to basically just have people stressed and make poor moves as a result of their stress. So, and on that front, I think that the Canadians have done a surprisingly good job with their retaliating tariffs, because I think it's been a more measured approach, as we've established. And Sunil was kind of talking about this with how the having tariffs on all the American goods immediately would have been basically just an additional tax on Canadians. Whereas at least the route that they're doing, where they're kind of doing they did like a 30 billion start with specific goods, and then they were going to ramp it up into the future. I think that's a more measured approach, where it's like, hey, we're gonna put like a bit of a threat on you, but it's not going to immediately hit Canadians in their pockets to the same extent. And there's going to be more of an opportunity for you to have time to adjust your preferences, learn what is Canadian, learn what is American, and make decisions based on that, so that you can buy products that aren't made in the US over products that are made in Canada of your own willingness, rather than being encouraged to artificially via tariffs. So, I think on that front, they did a pretty good job. All things considered, I do think that personally, I would say that there does have to be some sort of retaliation, because I just don't think that Trump is someone you can afford to just accept it laying down, even if debatably that would be the stronger route economically speaking, because you wouldn't have to pay for that additional costs as a consumer. But I think he needs some form of pushback in order to respect you, and I think that's a necessary piece of it. And so I think that the Canadians have done a pretty reasonable job. I think that we can weather the storm if we need to, mostly because a lot of our exports that we do export to the States are stuff that is essentially very difficult for the Americans to replace. Oil, electrical, electricity, and like the whole car industry, where it's so incestuously intermingled between the three countries. All three of those are basically our biggest exporters to the US. So they pretty much have to keep the tariffs on those ones lower because they rely on them, which means that we will see less of an impact on those industries, which are the largest ones that are exporting to the US. So we may still see a significant amount of damage, but it won't be maybe as bad as we were kind of worried, I think. I think maybe on that front, when I was thinking about looking at this originally, I was more fearful from the perspective, because I having oil and electricity is all good and fine. But there were other significant exports, such as the automotive. But with the additional understanding I've gotten of how intermingled and interconnected those are, I don't see how they can I don't see how they can tariff that industry in its current state without basically encouraging Americans to just buy not American cars anymore, because all the American brands are the ones who are primarily doing the inter-country trade to the same extent. Whereas from my understanding, like the Japanese cars in particular are not as connected through their supply chain. So it would be significant price ranges in the companies that America would want to be incentivizing people to buy, America first. Except, suddenly American vehicles become way more expensive than Japanese vehicles, and that's suddenly very undesirable. Yeah, so I think that pretty much covers what my thoughts are on the situation. Did I miss any questions, Andy?
No, I think you did a really great job at explaining everything, and I'm pretty much agree with everything you said back there. There's a couple of points from my end. What you said about like Trump doing this, on and again and off again tariff thing, just to like, unseat you, I guess you could say, or throw you off of your balance if you're an adversary or ally. I guess those are the same things to Trump these days. But yeah, I think that is part of the strategy, right? So what you said about, let's say, if you're a Canadian company or if you're an EU company and you're doing business with the United States, like it does throw a curveball at you. It throws a lot of uncertainty at you, and that's actually not good for the United States. But it could be good in the sense that if you have the opportunity to move to the United States, then that might just be the final straw that breaks the camel's back, right? That you might just decide, hey, I was maybe thinking of moving to the US before, but now with all this, like Trump doing all of this, I'm just going to move to the United States and I won't get tariffs for sure. And I think that's part of that's part of his plan, is to throw your opponents off balance so that like anyone who's even remotely thinking of moving to the US, they're going to be a lot more willing to move to the US. And he's also lowering the corporate tax for US-based companies to 15%, but only if you move to the United States, right? You can't do business in another country and then export to the US, then you don't get the discounted tax rate. So I think that kind of goes hand in hand with his tax strategy, and it could work to an extent, although it is kind of jarring, right? And I agree that it's probably not like his long-term plan is probably not to just like slap 25% tariffs on everybody for years and years, because it's unsustainable for the US as well, right? So I think it is part of a negotiation strategy at the end of the day. And doing all this, like, there's obviously the reasons that we talked about earlier about lowering the bond yields. I think that is a major part of it. And so that's that. And I also think that there is an argument to be made. I think, Sunil, you touched upon this earlier. There is an argument to be made that maybe we shouldn't counter tariff the United States as from the Canadian perspective, because if we are really to be fighting this long and drawn out trade war, then there's other retaliatory strategies that we could use, right? I've heard of people suggest that we could close the airspace to U.S. commercial flights, so that it makes their air travel a lot harder, right? And we also own the Northwest Passageway for shipping, so we close that to U.S. Shipping, container ships. There's other like things that we could try, right? But counter tariffing, especially to the extent, I know it's like, they did it in two chunks, right? $30 billion first, and then 21 days later, the 150 billion, the big chunk, is going to kick in. But, eventually, like, all of it's going to kick in if this trade war doesn't stop by then. And it's like, I think at the end of the day, you're making things more expensive for Canadians, and it's actually going to be counterintuitive to counterproductive to a point where it like reduces our ability to survive like a long drawn out trade war, because you're increasing costs on the everyday Canadian citizen, right? And if we're gonna borrow money or print money and then hand it out, eventually that's going to cause inflation down the line. So yeah, I mean, if we're really just like hunkering down for like a long trade war, I think that we should actually not counter tariff. And I know that that's not going to go over well with the mood of the Canadian politics scene, where like people are angry. But I think that that's like a legit strategy. But yeah, Sunil, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I was just gonna. I had a few things that just wanted to add, just based on what you guys said. But I guess I'll go with the counter tariffs. I guess that's fair. Like, if this is like, if Trump's just doing this as like a performative thing, and he's just gonna constantly like pull back on the tariffs within a day or two, then I guess we go with the counter tariffs because it makes noise with U.S. businesses at least. So I guess that kind of works. I even thought, like, I think like Doug Ford, even like his dramatic way of dealing with it was actually the most effective yesterday, because I guess he's able to get on U.S. TV, so that helps. But but yeah, I mean, like, if this is actually a long drawn out thing, counter tariffs would be disastrous for Canadian consumers. And the other thing is that, like, we already like have tariffs on US products, which already, like, we already kind of find ways to subsidize our own industry because we feel like our industry can't compete with the U.S. And I don't know. I just think it would just be a mess if we're counter tariffing and adding layers of costs in our economy. If that lasted several months, it would be disastrous for Canada. I don't think we could weather the storm personally. But maybe that we got some kind of we have a good middle ground in like targeting the very specific things, and I think that it probably made an impact. On the like negotiating tactic aspect of it, which is something I wanted to discuss, I just forgot to mention it. Like, that's the thing that's like very widely discussed, is that Trump is like art of the deal style negotiation tactics. Like, he doesn't use typical political negotiation tactics. He's more like using like sleazy salesman negotiation tactics, and I just think that that's obviously a part of it. Like, does Trump actually want to use tariffs as a way to like restructure America's tax code? Like, as somebody who like kind of worked in the policy world for a bit, I think that's just kind of an interesting project. So I'm kind of like interested to see what Trump has to say about that going forward. I'm not sure. I don't believe he's going to put like a blanket 25% tariff on all goods from allies in order to achieve this. But I'm kind of curious if Trump could find a way to use tariffs as a productive way of increasing revenues. It's just a question, like Tristan mentioned before, it's just a question on, like, it has to be very targeted, and it can't just be like everything. It can't just be blanket. But I mean, there's an aspect of this though, where like, if you look at the history of Trump, like, I think there's a part of it where my feeling when this first started was that he kind of just wanted to size everyone up when he first came into power. Like, if you remember, like, a lot of like the thorn in his side in his first administration, like, he had a lot of people blocking his agenda domestically. He also had a lot of people blocking his agenda internationally, and it ended up being American allies that effectively did a very effective job in blocking Trump's agenda and trying to, like, like, embarrass him at international meetings and stuff. So he's like dealing with a lot of the same people. So I think he just came out of the gates and decided, I'm going to size up all these people. I'm going to show them I'm boss. I'm going to like kind of scare everybody, and then he's going to pull back on all the threats and everything. And maybe he will choose selective areas where he will keep tariffs, and that would be like permanent U.S. policy. And I'm curious to see what that is. But in the end, it's Trump's art of the deal negotiating tactics that kind of always come up here.